Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, June 11th, 2020 special meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. This is a meeting by video conferencing only. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Francois.
Here.
Councilmember Silva.
Here.
Councilmember Waddell.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilk.
Here.
Mayor Haskew.
Here.
All council members are in attendance.
Thank you. As stated earlier, this is a meeting by video conference only. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20 issued on March 17, 2020, that allows attendance by members of the City Council, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meetings via video conference. Video conference locations are not open to the public. To provide a live remote public comment, please join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID is 939-2200-8808. That's 939-2200-8808. The password is 689628. Again, 689628. When we open the public comment period, please use the raised hand feature on your Zoom, or if you're doing it by audio only, press *9, which will alert the staff that you have a public comment you would like to provide. Please wait to your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and the city of residence for the record. As the council is conducting these meetings via video conference, and given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings, and consistent with the city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. Under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Does any member of the public wish to comment on the closed session item? The closed session item is a reconsideration of agenda item 2A from the June 9th, 2020 special meeting regarding anticipated litigation. This closed session relates to a letter dated June 6th, 2020, and an email dated June 8th, 2020, submitted by Scott Rafferty. These two items are available for review by contacting the city clerk. Public comment for the two consideration items will be considered during the council consideration of those items, or in other words, when we come back from the closed session. Please use the raised hand feature or *9 if that applies to you, if you would like to make a public comment. At this time, I will ask the city clerk if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments on the closed session.
It does look like we have some public comments, so we'll go ahead and let them in.
Thank you.
For Scott Rafferty.
Welcome, Scott. Please unmute. Thank you.
Hello, this is Scott Rafferty. I live here. It's painful to, be held responsible for speaking up, to be called passionate when, although I am passionate, I also think I'm well informed. And I have been to enough council meetings in other cities to believe that the Brown Act comment period is an essential part of the of the legislative process. It should be respected. I've seen it change minds. I've seen it as a means to address not only the council, but the public. And I suspect there's not much of the public available in this meeting. But I take it very seriously. I live here, and I think Fawn Hall abstracted into 2 sentences everything that you've been talking about in all of the overlapping meetings this week. She asked if you were listening, and she told you that you do not control the police. And that's been the unifying theme here. You have no policy control. You had an opportunity to do something really significant in terms of use of force policy for more than a year. Then you got this update, which said they had an increase in activity at the very onset of the quarantine, and nothing more for 2.5 months. No oversight, no policy input. I suspect I'm coming to the end of my 2 minutes, but when you get back, perhaps I could comment on the other 2 agenda items. I hope you have a public hearing or a town hall where there can be more than 2 minutes and people can actually interact, because this is really a core issue. 47% of the general fund is consumed by the police department, and there's no control. There's no democratic control, and that needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you. At this moment, we will now go into closed session for the reconsideration of agenda item 2A from June 9th, 2020 special meeting. Thank you.
Mayor, if we could we ask the city clerk if there were any other speakers
Oh, I'm sorry.
for this item?
We don't have any additional speakers, and we have not received any additional electronic comments.
Thank you very much, City Attorney. Now we're going into our closed session. We will be back, I think, fairly shortly. And welcome back. We are to the Thursday, June 11th, 2020 special meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. As a reminder, this meeting is by video conference only. Next on the agenda is an item for council consideration, and that item is reconsideration of agenda item 2.e from June 2, 2020, regular meeting of the City Council. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to ask if there was any reportable item before we go into the consideration. I'm going to ask if there was any reportable item from the closed session.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There was no reportable action from closed session today.
Okay. I am going to hope that everybody remembers what I said about the open session. If anybody wishes to speak on the matter, under public law, public comments at special meetings are limited to the subjects on the agenda only and within the agenda item. Therefore, public comment will be taken for the closed session item when we get to them. And remember, it is still at the 2 minutes COVID-19 restraint. May we have a reconsideration of agenda item 2E from June 2nd, 2020.
Madam Mayor, I'll make the staff report for this item for today.
Okay.
The council has before it this evening the COVID-19 update that you received initially at your June 2nd meeting. This item is on for reconsideration. The city did receive a request from Mr. Rafferty that this item be reconsidered because he had submitted some public comments for this item, and in comments they had been attributed to the general public comments. And so we've placed this item on in an abundance of caution for the council to be able to consider this again. Your packet this evening does contain the June 2nd COVID-19 update. It also contains the correspondence that Mr. Rafferty initially submitted that was read into the record on June 2nd for this item initially, and also contains an additional bit of correspondence from another speaker tonight that the city clerk can read into the record if the council would like. The item remains the same as it was on your June 2nd agenda. The city manager and I are available to answer questions for the council. As the council will recall, this is a receive and file item. There's no action associated with this item, but the council has been receiving the COVID-19 updates, both in terms of presentations and occasionally on the consent calendar, as this was on June 2nd. And with that, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions, as is Mr. Buckshire. And at the appropriate time, Ms. Martinez can read the second letter into the record, and we can read Mr. Rafferty's letter into the record too, but I am aware that Mr. Rafferty was online earlier on and he may wish to speak today, and we would recommend that the council entertain his public comments again today too, and anyone else's. Thank you.
Excellent. Is there anything that the council has in terms of a question? I see none, and there is no, I'm understanding there is no additional staff report, so we will ask for public comment. City Clerk, is there anybody queuing up to make public comment?
Yes, we're going to go ahead and bring in Scott Rafferty.
Thank you very much.
Well, I guess it's very well maybe a private audience this afternoon, and something that you regard as a formality. But you took a vote the other night. You put it on the agenda and you took a vote. A vote is an action under the Brown Act, and it's an occasion for public comment. But it's also a significant action when you accept a 2.5-month-old update that doesn't provide any transparency about the planning of the police department during the most acute emergency of my time living in this city, and perhaps a longer time than that. So I don't think you should accept this. I think you should have a true update from the police department about what happened. Since my previous correspondence, which I'm going to assume that you have read, I went back to the community crime map, and that I looked at to see when the riot started, that I looked at to see whether there was grounds for the curfew or not. Apparently, the police department simply stopped reporting to this crime map sometime in January. And this is an enormously powerful tool that has provided great gains in efficiency and in equity for police departments across the country. I don't understand why there is so little transparency. So I think that it is important. This is the most important job you have. I mean, the use of force, generally speaking, in a democracy has to be controlled by elected officials. And I think you should take this more seriously than you have. I think there should be reports. I think there should be transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment?
No additional raised hands, but I can go ahead and read the electronic comments received.
Please.
This email is dated June 9th, 11:49. Public comment regarding agenda item 2E, COVID 6/9/20. Dear Mayor and City Council, please allocate or facilitate funding for drive-through flu shots in Walnut Creek as a way to mitigate COVID-19 in our city beginning August 2020. I suggest that the funds come from the Police Department, Public Safety, given that the department represents approximately 1/3 of expenditures from our general fund. Perhaps they could also explore public-private partnership or use funds from the equipment, vehicles, etc. line items. Thank you for your attention to this urgent matter. I look forward to a public response. Sincerely, a concerned Walnut Creek resident and property owner.
Thank you. Okay, council comments, or may I have a motion? Yes, there is. Councilmember Silva.
So thank you very much, and thank you for those who provided us with input. The next week on Tuesday, we have scheduled an update to the council on what transpired between probably May 28th and today vis-a-vis the social and the social justice rallies, protests, and also the crime spree of May 31. So will the questions that Mr. Rafferty asked can they be addressed at that time vis-a-vis the crime map or some analytics tool that is on our website?
I'll initially respond. Mr. Buckshire may wish to add to that. We can respond on the status of the reporting on the crime map as part of the Tuesday meeting.
All right. Now, and then the other is, can we get a response vis-a-vis this recommendation from the member of the public about us sponsoring a drive-through flu shot, which I assume is an idea that if there were drive-through flu shots, then people wouldn't be interacting with each other wherever they would ordinarily get a flu shot. Can we get, the next time we have a COVID update, which I assume will be Tuesday, perhaps we can respond about how we would be working with the county on ensuring a healthier environment for flu shots.
For COVID-19 tests?
Well, actually it was about flu shots during
I got it. Okay.
Time of a pandemic. Maybe it was about health and safety, I think, of making a safer environment to receive a flu shot. And certainly we should be able to answer the question.
Okay, thank you. Is there an answer to the question, City Manager? Or
Dan, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I mean, if the council would like an update on that next Tuesday, we can verbally report that.
Yeah.
Because it's really a county health issue, and what's the county public health officer planning as they look at those same
also the suppliers of flu shots. Thank you. And now I would ask for some kind of motion to re-accept item 2E from the June 2nd, 2020 calendar.
And I will second it and say that I'm looking forward to Tuesday evening's discussion on all these issues.
Just to confirm, it's the move to accept the June 2nd, 2020 report on COVID-19 updates.
Correct. And that's
for the staff report.
Yes. Okay. Thank
Everyone
you.
clear?
Everyone's clear. Thank you very much. May I have a roll call, please?
Is anyone else having technical difficulties?
For a second. Now it's okay now.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Waddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Silva,
Aye.
Councilmember Francois.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilk,
Aye.
Mayor Haskew.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
All right, the next item is for consideration of the resolution of the City Council of Walnut Creek
Everyone needs to go on mute, but Lowell.
to ratify the order number 20-5 issued by the Director of Emergency Services terminating.
Madam Mayor, sorry to interrupt, but you're experiencing some technical difficulties on your side. You're coming in all jarbled.
Oh dear. Would somebody else please read the item then? Mayor Pro Tem, would you please read the item? You're on mute.
Sorry, I don't have that in front of me right now. Sorry.
Madam Mayor, I can, with the council's concurrence, I can read the name of the item. This is a consideration of a resolution of the City Council of the City of Walnut Creek ratifying order number 20-05 issued by the city manager in his role as Director of Emergency Services, terminating the citywide curfew order. That's the item that is before the council. And Madam Mayor, I will provide the staff report on that if you'd like.
I would like one. Yes.
So as the council is aware, there was instituted on the 31st a temporary curfew. The necessity of that curfew was evaluated on a daily basis by the staff. On Friday, June 5th, the city manager, acting in his role as the Director of Emergency Services, made a determination that it was appropriate to lift the curfew and did that via order number 20-05. The city's emergency services procedures and its municipal code do provide that the actions of the city manager acting as Director of Emergency Services of this type be confirmed by the City Council as soon as reasonably practical. So we have put this item on the agenda. We originally put it on Tuesday's agenda, as you're aware, but because of some difficulties we were having with Granicus, we recommended that you consider it today. And so that is the item that is before the council this evening. As you're aware, the curfew has in fact been lifted and has not been in place since last Friday. It actually, the effectiveness would have ended at 5 a.m. Friday morning, but practically it never took effect Friday night because Mr. Buckshire had terminated it before then. We're happy to answer any questions that the council has, but this is an action that the council would take consistent with your municipal code provisions. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'm going to try and speak as clearly as possible. No, still?
Mayor, I think it's your microphone. Why don't I take over at this point just to finish off the meeting?
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. Do we have any questions from City Council for our City Attorney? Seeing no questions, Susie, do we have any questions or comments from the public?
We do have public comment, so we'll go ahead and bring in Scott Rafferty.
Thank you.
Well, I'm aware of what seems to be the frustration of the council with what they regard as an insubstantial objection. But from soup to nuts, the curfew and the emergency declaration were a series of reckless disregard for the economic and civil liberties and simply the comfort and security of your constituents. We have an emergency management plan that is a draft. Now, assuming that Mr. Buckshire has the authority to do this, it's not normally done for 8 days, nor did it need to be done citywide. And yet it was, and you ratified it. But the resolution, because I was looking Monday expecting an emergency meeting, I didn't find out until the afternoon when I got an agenda that said there was a meeting at 6 p.m. But then halfway down the page, it said, no, this meeting happened at 11:30. That's a serious error. And the state law requires not only that you eliminate the curfew, but also that as soon as possible, you eliminate the emergency. The council, not the city manager, and you still haven't done that. So, this has caused inconvenience and discomfort and anxiety for your law-abiding citizens. Apparently, it was okay with the mayor if people in Shadelands just disregarded it. It created some economic injury for deliveries and shipments, and it provided discretion to a police department to do arbitrary arrests. We don't know what they did with this because crime reporting has been suspended. But none of these things are good. None are acceptable. The city needs to be better prepared for emergencies, and they need to confront that and recognize that and have a better process for having appropriately limited curfews. That this just was the opposite of everything that should have been done at each stage of this process. So I hope you take those comments more seriously and look for a way to address the problem that Ms. Hall identified, which is you don't control the police. And that needs to change. They need to be zero-based budgeted, not defunded, but they need to justify that $25 million, and they need to confront the same economic realities that the other essential services of the city are. So I hope that you can eliminate the emergency as soon as possible, although I realize that's not agendized for this special meeting. But this was not the way a curfew should be imposed. And of course, until I brought it to the attention of the council, it was on the website Monday that it was still in effect. And I couldn't even do that by email because my email has been blocked from the city clerk. So it just seems like everything went wrong, and I think it's time for the council to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any other members of the public, Susie?
No additional commenters. No.
Okay. I'm going to ask Steve Mattis as the city attorney to provide some feedback on how legally we went through this. But first, let me ask if we have any comments that anybody on city council would like to make.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem. Sorry about that.
My hair is getting long and I do need a haircut. I acknowledge that.
The one issue that I would just like to ask, maybe if there's an answer tonight, that'd be great. But if not, to add to the ongoing list for next week, is maybe just some sort of explanation of how other municipalities handle this. It's my understanding that most major cities that were going through this did have a curfew. It's my understanding that some cities, like Rodeo Drive, actually had a 1 p.m. curfew. So just to provide information to the public and to the council to make sure that we weren't out of the norm, and how other municipalities handle this would be, I think, would go a long way to answering that question.
Thank you. Commissioner or Council Member Silva?
Thank you. Perhaps the city attorney can also respond to. I mean, we noticed the meeting. We were in the meeting for quite a while. That we received a lot of public comment, as I remember, about the pros and cons about a curfew and many questions. But also what the emergency authorities are of our city manager. I mean, we're not a charter city, we're a general law city. Maybe that's some of the confusion that exists out there, because our powers as a council are different, I believe, and what we can and can't do and what we entrust into the power of the city manager. So perhaps we can get clarification on that as well.
Thank you. And with that, Steve, why don't I turn it over to you to respond in any way?
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, a couple of issues. The government code and the city's municipal code both provide the authority to declare emergencies, and also those provisions also authorize the Director of Emergency Services to make orders that are necessary for the preservation of public health and safety. And so when the events began, in particular on the 31st, the Sunday evening, as I recall, the city manager exercised that authority and issued an order and instituted a curfew that went in effect at 6 p.m. on that evening. That's the evening where the looting activities were taking place in the Broadway Plaza area. The curfew itself was set up initially to be in effect from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. that first night, and then was going to be in effect from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. thereafter. 5 a.m., I'm sorry, 5 a.m. Thank you, Mayor. 5 a.m. thereafter. And it was originally set to go through June 8th. The council, as you recall, did take an action to ratify that curfew, and as part of that action, the curfew for the second night also began at 6 p.m. and again went through 5 a.m. the next morning. The statute that allows the imposition of curfews under these circumstances does allow you to designate the boundaries of the curfew. Now, obviously, Walnut Creek is constrained by the fact that it can only regulate within Walnut Creek, and the curfew did cover the entire city, and that was in part because some of the criminal activity had happened in the downtown, but there were also threats of criminal activity in other areas. And if you looked at other communities that were experiencing similar things, the looting type activity in particular was dispersed across the communities. It wasn't just focused in one area. And so the city manager adopted that. The council ratified that at a notice meeting, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then it was in place and it was evaluated daily. The executive team met every day and has met every day, almost every day, frankly, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, but also during this period where there's been looting, but there's also been peaceful protests and whatnot. The executive team has been meeting every day. And on Friday, the city manager felt that it was appropriate public safety within the community to lift the curfew order. Mr. Rafferty is correct that the emergency declaration related to the civil arrest has not yet been lifted, but there are no other orders issued pursuant to it. So it did not need to be lifted immediately. And we were aware of the fact that the circumstances were still evolving, as we all know, as we see through activities throughout the country, most of which recently, very much admittedly, have been peaceful protests that have been happening. But the lifting of the local emergency will be a council action. That is clear. We will bring that to the council at the time that we think it's appropriate. And the council should recall that there's essentially two local emergencies in place right now. There was one also for the pandemic itself. And so we will likely bring back to the council soon the lifting of the local emergency declaration related to the civil unrest that went on, but we don't have any plans to bring back, unless Mr. Buckshot feels differently, I'm sure he doesn't, the one related to the pandemic, because that is still a circumstance we're all experiencing. With regards to the meeting on Monday, the council special meeting, the emergency meeting actually is what it was. We do want to acknowledge that the agenda itself that was issued to the council was correct. It did identify the 11:30 time. The agenda that was posted on the website was also correct. It also identified the 11:30, and it continues to identify the 11:30. But we believe there is a mechanism happening within Granicus that Susie and I have been discussing, and that we're trying to remedy. That when after the meeting occurs, there's a process where it gets essentially updated on the agenda on the Granicus platform that we use. And in that process, we believe it converted a number in the agenda from the original time of 11:30 in the morning to 6 p.m. And so we're looking at that to see how that happened and to make sure that happens. I believe that's the source of the concern that Mr. Rafferty has expressed, because he did bring that to our attention. We did look at that to see what it was. We did also look specifically at the agendas that were issued, and they all did identify 11:30 as the appropriate time. So I'm very comfortable that the council was appropriately in it. Even the agenda that had one reference to 6 p.m., as Mr. Rafferty has noted, and I will affirm to the council, it also clearly identified the meeting as 11:30 that day. And so we're identifying that there's some glitch that we have to address associated with the Granicus system, but it actually didn't manifest itself, as we understand it, until after the meeting. So those are the primary issues. The third issue that I would raise, and we can address the issue that Councilmember Waddell raised about what other cities did, but we were looking at that when we were adopting this, and many of the curfews were in the same time periods that we had, definitely 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., some earlier. Santa Monica went as early as 4 o'clock when they were having some of their really dramatic events going on. And as noted, Beverly Hills, at least a portion of it, went even earlier. And so there was some variability, but it was generally geared towards the evening hours. As many of you have probably seen, some curfews were later across the country. New York City for a while had theirs start at 11 p.m. And so while there was variability, there was a commonality that it was generally in the evening hours to the early morning hours. Councilmember Waddell, we can provide further information as part of the report on Tuesday if you like, but I wanted to share with you the thought process that we went through when the curfew was initially adopted.
Thank you, Steve. And Justin, hold on 1 minute. Just have a quick clarification, Steve. You had said that there is the emergency order that is still underway, but there are no items associated with it. Therefore, de facto, there is nothing that's happening that would be any different than it would be otherwise. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's an emergency proclamation that was related to the civil unrest. It has not been removed yet because the council has to remove that itself. We have to agendize that for you to do that. But there are no orders issued pursuant to that. So there are no restrictions. There are frankly no restrictions associated with that emergency proclamation right now.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Waddell.
Just one question, or I guess maybe two questions here. The first one is, when will the emergency proclamation come back, or the rescinding of the emergency proclamation come back to the council? I think just to address one of Mr. Rafferty's concerns, which is completely understandable, that there's a sense of unease associated with it.
Well, we at the staff level, we haven't fully discussed that. We do not anticipate bringing it back to you on your meeting on Tuesday, but I do think it's reasonable to assume, and I would invite further comment from the city manager on this, that it would likely come back to you at the next meeting, assuming no change in circumstances. Assuming the circumstances stay as they are right now, we would likely bring it back to you at your next meeting.
Okay. And then also, Steve, one of the things that you did not address, and this is days are running, it seem like they're running more than 24 hours now. It's also my understanding that Contra Costa had their own curfew independent of ours. So even if ours wasn't there, at least for June 2nd and June 3rd and going into June 4th, independent of us, that curfew would have affected, independent of our emergency proclamation and curfew, the Contra Costa curfew would have applied to Walnut Creek also.
That is correct for a number of days during ours. They adopted theirs later, and I believe theirs terminated a day before ours did, as I recall.
I think it went in on June 2nd and then went through June 4th when they
That's
rescinded.
June 4th, correct.
Thank you.
Looks like you have your hand raised. I see. Okay, let's go to Cindy.
So a question about the June 1st meeting. I went back through my notes and there were at least 12 people who commented publicly, which means somebody figured out that there was a meeting. How did we notice the meeting and publicize that we were having the meeting at 11:30? And maybe the clerk answers that, or I don't know. Since, I mean, it was an emergency meeting, it happened fast.
Right. Susie, do you want to start the answer on that, please?
Susie Martinez, City Clerk. So we noticed via our, we have an e-distribution list, and there's about 1,000+ individuals on that list. So we sent out an email blast via Gov Delivery. We also sent, as you know, to the council and to designated staff the agenda.
So as our primary outreach in that short period of time was, in fact, through the 1,000 email list that we have, that we notice all of our meetings through.
Correct, and it includes the East Bay Times and such.
So the media were advised as well. Thank you.
And Susie, it was also posted on our agenda earlier too, is that correct? Not on our agenda, but on our website.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
And my second question is, one of the comments was that our website still says, are we under curfew, or is it the reference to that there's an emergency proclamation? Because I know on Friday when the curfew was rescinded, I think one of the comments that we were talking about was got to change the page of the website to indicate that the curfew is no longer in effect. And I haven't looked at the homepage of the website.
The homepage of the website was immediately updated when the curfew was lifted. Mr. Rafferty brought to our attention that there was a secondary page on which there was a list of various items, and one of those items under public safety referenced the curfew, and it still showed the original entry we had, which was through June 8th. As soon as that was brought to our attention, we corrected that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? Seeing no other questions or comments, this will bring an adjournment of the City Council special meeting.
Don't we have to make a motion?
Hold on. Yeah, before we adjourn, we do need, there's a resolution that is associated with the item 3B that we would ask, and this is the resolution of the council ratifying order number 20-05, terminating the citywide curfew.
Move to adopt the attached resolution ratifying order number 20-05, terminating the citywide curfew order issued by the city manager in his capacity as Director of Emergency Services.
Second.
I heard Cindy is the second. We have a motion and a second. City Clerk, could you please read the roll?
Councilmember Waddell.
Aye.
Councilmember Silva.
Aye.
Councilmember Francois.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor,
Oh, sorry.
Mayor Haskew.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, apologize for skipping ahead on that. I think we are done with this special meeting. And with that, I will call adjournment on behalf of Mayor Luella Haskew. And until our next meeting, I bid you adieu. Thank you.